Win big in 2024 with Team Sync from RotoBaller. Import your fantasy teams and sync your leagues. Get customized tools and tailored advice for your specific rosters and scoring settings, including live recommendations from the live draft assistant, free agent finder, and lineup optimizer. Sync an unlimited amount of NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL fantasy teams from all of the major fantasy platforms. Get a discount for any premium pass using my promo code KNUCKLER. Just visit rotoballer.com/radio and start rotoballing like a boss. This podcast is also brought to you by Parlay Play Fantasy Sports. Use my referral code RotoBrady. Get that sweet, sweet deposit bonus. They got paid contests coming to a state near you. Boosts, slash lines, bonuses all day long. Check it out. Play some player prop DFS contests there. It's a real fun platform. And what is up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you episode 157 of RotoBaller's official MMA podcast. Tap that. We got UFC Vegas 100 this weekend.
Break out the red panties.
What cigarette do you smoke, Doctor?
And, so this past week, what I will say, one, we have a lot of good MMA action this week. Hell, Invictus going on tonight. We got 169, LFA 196, Octagon 63. For my picks on all of that kind of stuff and more, follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube, Facebook, and Spotify. Oh, God, no more Facebook. Done with Facebook. Just YouTube and Spotify. Come out to the RotoBaller MMA Discord this Saturday, all throughout the day. Let's talk about UFC Vegas 100. Let's talk about what you're doing DFS-wise and gambling-wise. Check out my MMA DFS Values Picks article that comes out on Friday afternoons before these cards. And I will be coming out with slideshow material through RotoBaller coming up that'll be available on MSN. Apparently we have a partnership with them, so check that out. Looking forward to expanding my horizons. Yeah, one quick note, from this past week, I did win, the pick'em game that I play on a weekly basis. It was a good week. Went 4 for 5. And, most importantly, I think, Brandon Moreno was very much the right call. And, that was a great fight with Amir Albazi. Moreno looked phenomenal. And I think, it reinforces what we kind of thought about both. I did not think Amir Albazi is a guy that can win the title right now, at least as it stands. He's not a prospect that I took as seriously as some of those other prospects in the flyweight division, but Brandon Moreno remains world-class. He looks slick as hell on Saturday. So, there was a bunch of different results from that card. It was fun viewing. Again, there were some crazy decisions. That's going to happen every week now. Get used to that. But I am super looking forward to UFC Vegas 100. There's a few key fights that I am going to be tuned in on. We've got 12 fights left on this card after Cody Garbrandt and Miles Johns was unfortunately scrapped. Yeah, but we are starting off with a women's bantamweight match between Claudia Saigula and Melissa Mullins. Combined record, 12-2 between those two fighters. Let's start off with Melissa Mullins, who is going to be here, the minus 245 favorite. No mess Mullins, 33 years old, 3 knockouts, 3 decisions in her career. Does have a UFC win against Irina Alekseeva. October last year, came in through Aries FC, solid organization there as well, and did get knocked out in the second round, her second UFC fight, April of this past year against Nora Cornole. Her opponent, Claudia Saigula, 6-1 as a pro, 25 years old, currently ranked 99th in the world in women's bantamweight, 2 knockouts, 1 submission, 3 decisions in her career. Coming in through MMA, GP, FEN, Army of Fight Night. Her 1 professional loss is to Carolina Sobek, who she also has a win against in her first professional fight. Long-standing amateur career for her as well. I think this makes sense. I guess my problem, at least in terms of picking a particular outcome here is like I do think Melissa Mullins is rightfully favored here. Like I think that just having the UFC experience alone, I don't really trust Saigula's, experience prior to coming into the UFC. I think it's very hit or miss. But coming in through Ares FC and having a UFC win, and Nora Cornole, she's been hit or miss too. But I think that is, I definitely don't completely lose faith in somebody because they lost to her, despite how that last fight went for her. I don't know. I think that we've only seen Saigula submitted before. I do think that, Mullins maybe still even by TKO knockout, that's plus 600. I think that's a solid value. I do think that this fight, I think that Mullins probably ends up winning this fight 70 times out of 100. I think minus 245 is reasonable. Over 2.5 is minus 250. Under 2.5 is plus 200. I don't think that is unreasonable. If I was going to go Saigula, I probably just go by decision plus 340. It's hard to have too many opinions on this one, especially women's bantamweight. I don't think you would be a bad decision either if you just decided to go Saigula just as the underdog here on the principle of the matter of, it's UFC women's bantamweight between two fighters with not much UFC experience between the two. I think maybe if you were going to go crazy, maybe Saigula buys submission plus 1,300. She has a handful of those back in her IMMAF days. But that was now 5 years ago. So that's as much as I think about that one. That's maybe one I would think about not betting. I don't even feel great about the outcomes there. Just that I think that fight is probably appropriately handicapped. Next up, we got a middleweight matchup between Tresean Gore and Antonio Tricoli. Tresean Gore, the guy that was supposed to be, in the Ultimate Fighter finale a couple of years ago against Brian Battle. Gore is the minus 162 favorite, Tricoli the plus 142 underdog. Let's start off with Tresean, Mr. Vicious Gore. It was a rough start. He ends up getting that fight against Brian Battle, gets pretty thoroughly worked back in February 2022. Then gets knocked out in the first round by Cody Brundage, July of that year. His last fight now, somehow, was over 2 years ago. October 2022, a UFC Fight Night, Qatar versus Allen. He got the second round submission over Josh Frim. So, I can forgive a fight with Brian Battle, absolutely. I love Brian Battle. You all know that. But it's the, going 1-1 against two of the worst middleweights in the division is, it calls for concern. Tricoli, it's hard to, fault this guy too much for, the loss that he does have, at least in the UFC level. He's 12-4 as a professional. And, his losses to Shara Magomedov back in June of this year, actually, by third-round knockout. He got outstruck 82-16 in that fight. And there was the overturned neck crank that he had against Kenneth Berg on the Contender Series, July of 2019, and ended up working his way back. 33 years old, 6'5", as a middleweight, 80-inch reach, 3 knockouts, 5 submissions, 4 decisions. I mean, the guy's last MMA victory is November of 2021. Had a bunch of fights against Umar Sy, Ovince St. Preux, and Ikram Aliskerov in between. I question his professional pedigree even before. I mean, before, all the way back in 2015, he was fighting guys like Jacob Volkman, Diego Lima, Wendell Oliveira. It just seems like somehow at 33 years old, his best days, or at least the most reputable fights kind of are behind him. Not really, but, I think that this one is well within Tricoli's reach, but I think minus 162 on Tresean Gore is absolutely fair enough. Tricoli did not look good against Shara Bullet. Didn't, just wasn't able to get any offense off. And Tresean Gore, I think, did turn a corner in that Josh Frim fight. Something got right, that wasn't right for a bit. Because he looked great on The Ultimate Fighter. And, just had a bad series of fights, against Battle and Cody Brundage. That was, maybe we can look back on that and say that that's going to be an outlier of a fight. I think Gore does. Like, I think he's just the better fighter here. I think he's more dynamic. I think that, like, if this fight stays on the feet, I think, like, Gore could, like, end up taking some bigger shots. But I do think that, like, he's going to just out-volume Tricoli on the feet. I think that he's slick enough on the ground to put Tricoli in some dangerous positions. And I think his strikes will be meaningful, too. So, minus 162, I think Gore actually wins this fight, like, 70 to 75 times out of 100, minus 162. Hit it. And as far as an outcome, that's a tough one. Like, I don't think Tresean Gore knocks him out. Tricoli, in his career, 2 losses by knockout, 2 by decision. I don't love going with a method of victory in this fight either. Like, I like Tresean Gore minus 162. I think over 2.5 plus 110 in this fight is reasonable. Gore by decision plus 225. Gore inside the distance plus 150. Damn, I think I'd rather go Tresean Gore by decision, but, like, I don't know. He was able to submit Josh Fremd. Maybe Gore inside the distance plus 125. What was it? No, plus 150. Maybe that is the better value. I think those are pretty damn close, though. And then if I'm going Tricoli, I probably am going, like... What am I doing here if I go Tricoli? I don't know, maybe if I'm going Tricoli, maybe I do, like, go by decision. That's plus 400. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to, how do you make a call on a guy like Tricoli who's had so few fights and so little activity, so many canceled fights, 0 wins in 3 years? Yeah, like, I'm staying real away from Tricoli because I do think Tresean Gore is at a reasonable number here. But, those are 2 tough ones starting off the gate. Now we got a bantamweight matchup. Cody Stamann and Damon Blackshear. Fun bantamweight matchup, and, like, this doesn't actually make any sense to me. The hell? Hold on, folks. Sorry, my cat was scratching at the door. Cody Stamann somehow has not fought Damon Blackshear. It seems like a matchup that would have happened several times by this point. Damon Blackshear is the minus 275 favorite. Stamann the plus 235 underdog. Let's start off with Cody Stamann. All right, so he has now lost 2 in a row, both by unanimous decision to Douglas Silva de Andrade and Taylor Lapilus. Both reasonably competitive fights. The Douglas Silva de Andrade fight was really close. He got outstruck 61-54, got a takedown, and got a knockdown in that fight. He was on a 2-fight winning streak from June 2022 to January 2023 with a first-round knockout over Eddie Weidlin and a unanimous decision win with 103 strikes landed against Luan Lacerda. This guy's had to fight some super tough bantamweights. I mean, he has a draw against Song Yadong, losses to Aljamain Sterling, Jimmy Rivera, Merab, Syed Nurmagomedov, wins at Brian Caraway, Brian Kelleher. Don't fight this guy if your name's Brian. Damon Blackshear, on the other hand. This is the crazy... I don't get this part. This seems a little crazy. Damon Blackshear is 2-3-1 in the UFC. He's had to fight some tough guys too, for sure. But comparable competition. A draw and a loss in his first 2 fights in the UFC, both by decision against Yusuf Zaleo and Farid Basharat. 2 submissions, including a twister over Jose Johnson, and then the knockout over Luan Lacerda. And then now he's riding 2 straight losses against Mario Batista, and a fight that was super close. And let's see, it was 30-27 on 1, 29-28 on 2 judges' scorecards. But he outstruck Mario Batista 90-79, took him down 4 times to 2, got knocked out in the first round by Montel Jackson back in July of this year. That seems nuts. I think it's reasonable that, just in a well-roundedness aspect, Cody Stamann is a good bantamweight, just a little bit, not one-dimensional, maybe, 2-dimensional. He lands some hard shots on the feet. I think his striking is, it's limited in its versatility. Damon Blackshear just, a little bit more hard to predict. He's zigging and zagging and he's zigging when you're zagging, and maybe before the Taylor Lapilus fight. I think that Cody Stamann honestly can win this fight like 35 times out of 40. It seems like a fight where I take the underdog and then get very frustrated as the fight goes on, but plus 235, that is tempting to me. Damone Blackshear minus 275, I think that's pretty fair, but I think no, it's not. That's what I just said. Like, that is actually a little bit too much, I think. But Cody Stamann has proven very hard to finish in his UFC career. He's only been subbed twice, only been finished twice. Both were submissions. Both were to Said Nurmagomedov and Aljamain Sterling. So I think it would be a lot to say that Damone Blackshear is able to actually finish Cody Stamann. Now, he could. He's a crafty grappler for sure. I think that, Damone Blackshear by decision, and Cody Stamann by decision, plus 275, I think that, that's pretty much the same as a bet on Cody Stamann, plus 235. This fight going under 2.5 is plus 285. So I'm probably not touching an over-under in this one because I do think, I'm kind of split on those numbers. Damone Blackshear could finish a lot of guys at this level. I just don't know if he's going to be able to finish Cody Stamann just based on Cody Stamann's long history in the UFC or time tested. Damone Blackshear by decision minus 135, probably the safest way to go for him. If I was going to go anything else, I'd probably go Damone Blackshear by submission plus 400. But yeah, Stamann by decision is probably the single most predictable outcome. But I still think Blackshear by decision minus 135. And then if you're trying to go a little bit crazier, Blackshear by submission plus 400. Hell, I could see this one being a split decision too. I don't think that would be crazy, especially with the contrast and kind of the way that these guys fight their well-rounded fights. Plus 900 for Stamann by split decision, plus 700 for Blackshear. And hell, I could see that happening in the first fight of the night too. The Saigula and the Melissa Mullins fight. So next up, we've got a welterweight matchup between Matthew Semelsberger and Charles Radke. No one's paying you for an interview, Charles. Maybe someone is, but the press conference, they seemed disinterested.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
I hate that guy, just based on that soundbite alone, honestly. But Charles Radke is the minus 150 favorite. Semelsberger, the plus 130 underdog. Let's start off with Charles Radke then. All right, so can definitely give him credit for these first two fights. I definitely couldn't give him too much credit for the win over Blood Diamond. It was a win. It was just pretty lackluster. Then he bounced back in a big way and destroyed Gilbert Urbina February of this year, actually. He's coming back for his third fight in 2024. Knocked him down twice before finishing him in the first round. Possibly putting an end to the line of the Urbina brothers in the UFC. But then he bounces back, or comes back, June of this year and gets knocked out in the first round by Carlos Paredes, who we will talk about later. But honestly, as much grief as I would like to give Charles Radke, not a bad start in the UFC. Wins against guys that you got to beat, and a loss to a guy that I completely understand you losing to. Semelsberger, somehow 2 years younger than Charles Radke. Semi the Jedi. That's got to be the way that nickname is actually pronounced. I just think of him as Semelsberger. But this guy's been in the UFC since August of 2020, and wins over Carlton Minus, Jason Witt, Martin Sano, AJ Fletcher, Jake Matthews. The problem now is, in losses to Chaos Williams, Alex Morono, very understandable. He's now lost 3 in a row and 4 of his last 5. His last win was December of 2022. Lost by split decision to Jeremiah Wells, who took him down 6 times. He did knock Wells down twice in that fight. Gets knocked out in the third round against Uros Medic, and he's coming off a unanimous decision loss to Preston Parsons. So, yeah, I think Radke is rightfully favored here, especially when you look at, the Preston Parsons loss for Matthew Semelsberger, in which, I thought he was a good value. He might have been the underdog in that one. But to get taken down 7 times, that's the problem, though. I don't think Charles Radke is well-rounded enough to take advantage that well of some of Smellsberger's shortcomings. I do think that, Radke is just going to be in a good position to, if he needs a takedown, I'm sure he can go for it. But I think more as Smellsberger's kind of doing his, trying to land his volume strikes, which he really just, has not been doing a very good job of. People have been shutting him out. He lands the big shots for sure. And so, I do think that this fight, under 2.5 rounds, I think there's a good shot at that. I think that, both these guys could get hurt at one point in this. I do just think, Radke probably wins this fight at this point, 55 to 60 times out of 100. I don't hate Smellsberger at all at plus 130, but if I'm going I'd go Radke by knockout plus 350 or Radke by decision plus 165, and then Smellsberger by knockout plus 275, and then Smellsberger by decision plus 450. I pretty evenly split, and I think that all 4 of those are actually decent values. This might be one that I avoid too, because I think that I think there's going to be a lot of damage in this one. But I think these lines are fair. I don't hate even Radke money line minus 150. There's 6 bets that I see could be completely reasonable in this fight, which makes me want to avoid it. But I know I'll end up picking something, and I think probably Radke money line, probably the safest way to go, and I think it's at a safe number. Next up, we've got another welterweight match between Zachary Scroggin and Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. Zaleski dos Santos. They don't even have... This was the replacement. Because originally Zaleski dos Santos was going to fight Nicholas Dalby, and now it's Zachary Scroggin's in. Scroggin. 7-0 as a professional. They don't have the odds out for this yet. So, let's just start off talking about Elizeu Zaleski. 24-8-1 as a pro, 37 years old, still ranked 23rd in the world at welterweight, according to Tapology.com. And, look at these names that he has actually fought just in the last few years. Now, granted, his, activity level hasn't been phenomenal, but let's just go back to 2021, okay? You can go back further and find some, big names still. I mean, my God, he has a win over Sean Strickland, Max Griffin, Lyman Good. He's been in the UFC for, since 2015. And I feel like there were some other, big names, too. You go back further. But, fought and beat Curtis Millender. But go back to 2021. Decision win over Benoit Saint-Denis. Decision win over Abubakar Nurmagomedov. A majority draw with Renat Fakhretdinov. And then coming off a unanimous decision loss to Randy Brown, he got outstruck 67-26. That was June of this year at UFC 302. He did land 4 takedowns. I think this was 29-28 on all 3 judges' scorecards. So it was a competitive fight. And it was competitive against Renat Fakhretdinov too. Otherwise, he's decently close to having 4 wins in a row against 4 good names, for sure. So it makes sense, if he's going to end up being the favorite here. We've just seen some very weird things from people, who are fighting late replacements that are coming in lately. But I think the advantage here is that Zaleski has seen a lot in his time in the UFC. He's seen good opponents, beaten really good opponents. Beat the guy that ended up going on to be the UFC middleweight champion. So I think Zaleski is just a little bit more well-suited to roll with the punches than, say, a guy Jake Hadley.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
So, on to Zachary Scroggin, who will be making his UFC debut on Saturday. Scroggin, 28 years old, 6'3", with a 74.5-inch reach, 3 wins by knockout, 2 by submission, 2 by decision, has never been beaten in his professional career. Came in through FAC. Every one of his professional fights was with FAC. And, wins mostly over guys with winning records. The combined record of his last 2 opponents, including in his title fight against Zach Busia at FAC 24 back in May of this year, combined record of those 2 opponents was 28-31. Don't love to see that going into a fight against Elizeu Zaleski. Yeah, he's had a professional and amateur career was in Shamrock FC. You know, he's never lost as an amateur or pro. You can't take that away from him. I can take away that, like, I'm not that impressed with him. And like, in direct contrast, you look through and you're, like, shocked to see the people that Elijah Zaleski dos Santos has beaten in his professional career. And you don't have to go back that far. And not to mention, it has been over 5 years since one of his fights didn't go the distance. And that was a knockout that he lost, that he was on the wrong side of against Li Jiangliang. So back in August of 2019, UFC on ESPN Plus 15 is what that was called. Before then, you know, he was knocking people out, but he is through these stretches where like he'll knock, you know, 4 people out in a row, and then he'll have 4 straight decisions. Like, I think, like, especially at the age of 37, fighting a guy in his UFC debut, you know, this is all kinds of weird. I think Zaleski's going to be a favorite here. I think that he does win this fight probably like 80 times out of 100. Again, I think he's going to roll with this punch pretty well. And actually, I'm now seeing the odds. Zaleski minus 550. Makes sense. You know, they're not going to have any props out yet. I think, like, Zaleski by decision makes plenty of sense. You know, like, if this was the matchup they had originally made, that'd be one thing. You know, then I think, like, you know, maybe he has the time to prepare and put this guy away. But, like, there's just going to be a little more hesitance, maybe, you know. And, like, at 37, Zaleski's skill set is, you know, just fighting a mixed martial arts fight and filling the gaps in that fight, you know. If he can take you down, he's going to take you down. If his strikes are landing, he's going to keep throwing them. You know, he's a smart fighter. That's how he's gotten the wins against the opponents that he has. So, you know, probably not going with Zaleski in DFS unless, like, I'm very wrong about what he kind of scores in these winning performances. But Zaleski by decision, I think, makes a ton of sense. And if I'm going with anything else, I'd probably say, like, Zaleski by knockout. But when you're talking about a 9-year age difference with Zaleski being the elder, that's not one that I want to try. So if I'm going with anything here, it's Zaleski by decision. Or maybe, like, if there's a prop of, like, over 1.5 rounds or over 2.5, but I don't, like, maybe over, like, 1.5. Now, like, no, I don't see those being good values. Everything is going to be geared, I think, towards Zaleski by decision here. And you know, but take advantage of that if you see that people are favoring Zaleski by, you know, knockout as opposed to the fight going 3 rounds. Next up, we got a bantamweight matchup between Gaston Bolanos and Cortavius Romeus. I'm going to say Romeus. Sounds way cooler anyway. Romeus, the minus 220 favorite. Bolanos, the plus 185 underdog. So let's start off with Romeus. 9-2 as a pro. Cut as hell, this dude. 30 years old. His last fight was August of this year in the Contender Series. Again, 9-2 as a pro. 5 wins by submission, 2 by knockout, 2 by decision. He has won 5 of his last 6 fights. Again, like, a varying quality level, for sure. You know, you go back, like, the start of his professional career. And hell, like, he has a loss to David Onama by unanimous decision back in 2017 at the end of his amateur career. So that kind of speaks to a quality level, for sure. He has a fight against Jornel Lugo that he lost by split decision at SFT 23. And, you know, before getting his second fight on the Contender Series, he got knocked out in round 1 against Ramon Tavares, October of 2023. A fight where he, like, definitely, like, had his moments, but I at least like to see, like, he has a round 1 armbar win against Nate Williams in LFA just a little over a year ago. Now he's on 2 straight wins, a round 1 armbar over Eric Vo, who was only 15-28 at the time when they fought on 420 this year. Now he's coming off a unanimous decision on the Contender Series over Michael Imperato. And in that fight, Romeus outstruck him 40-29. He did get taken down once, but he did get a knockdown. Gaston Bolanos, all right, came into the UFC, debuting April of 2023 with a unanimous decision victory over Aaron Phillips, outstriking him 63-17. He did get taken down 3 times. Now, Bolanos did get coming off a loss by second-round knockout to Marcus McGee, January of this year. So, like, you know, so what are the odds on this again? Bolanos is plus 185, huh? Yeah, I think this is a toss-up. Like, for real, like, I could give Ramirez a lot of credit for, you know, the opponents that he's lost to throughout his career, the few that he has. They're UFC-level names, or at least higher organization-level names. And I don't trust the 2 times on the Contender Series guys where it's one loss and one win. You know, like, I think, you know, usually on the Contender Series, the vast majority of the time, whether someone is a guy that's going to hang around in the UFC or whether they're just kind of like filling a gap right now. That's kind of how I feel about Ramirez. Bolanos, I'm not as negative. I mean, it's crazy. He's 7-4 as a professional. But this is also a guy that has fought in, you know, Bellator, you know, and in kickboxing too. So, like, he hasn't fought, like, big Bellator names, but, like, his Muay Thai pedigree, the fact that he has, like, fought multiple times on the Bellator platform against solid, like won in a UFC debut with a good performance. The only loss that we've seen from him in over 4 years, you know, being to Marcus McGee, who's, you know, definitely someone to watch in this weight class. 8 knockouts, only 1 professional loss for him. I don't know. All of that being said, I think that this is pretty even. Like, I think Bolanos can win 50 of these out of 100. Plus 185. Hit it. And, you know, I don't think, like, you need to pick an outcome here necessarily. I would be inclined to like the fact that Bolanos, it's crazy that he's 7-4 as a pro, but, like, 6 of those wins by knockout. I do like Bolanos by knockout, and that's plus 225. I think that Ramirez is going to give him those opportunities, and I think, like, Ramirez by knockout plus 600, I don't think that's a bad number either. Under 2.5 in this fight is minus 205. So, like, if I'm going for Bolanos in this one, I'm going for Broca plus 225, but I do think, like, the money line plus 185 is a very logical number. It's just that, like, you know, Ramirez just did not impress me to that level. And in a fight like of this caliber, if I can take someone that, you know, I think the resume is actually very comparable, but you're telling me of professional, just straight up striking experience, that kind of pushes me over to, like, from one edge to the other. So I'm not sure exactly why this fight is handicapped the way that it is. Let's see here. You know, and this deserves a drop. Bolanos.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie. Come on.
No reason to be scared. Forget that fight against Marcus McGee. Marcus McGee is a very good fighter in the UFC. A lot of people could have ended up knocked out in that fight. Who's Cortavious Ramirez? A guy that needed 2 fights on the Contender Series? You've been in the Bellator. You've been in professional Muay Thai and kickboxing fights. Don't be scared, homie. Next up, we got a women's strawweight matchup between Carolina Kovalkiewicz and Denise Gomez. Denise Gomez is the minus 550 favorite. Carolina Kovalkiewicz, the plus 420 underdog.
Don't do this. You cannot do this, you know?
Let's start with Carolina Kovalkiewicz, the longtime veteran of the UFC women's strawweight division. Carolina Kovalkiewicz. Crazily, like, this is a fighter that went 3 years, 5 fights, 0 wins in the UFC. And a lot of them were on pay-per-view cards, crazily enough. But, you know, she lost 5 in a row. It was looking bad. She was born in 1985, so she's pushing 40 years old as it stands right now. But then you really look at, and not only that, like, she technically lost, let's say, 7 of 9 fights over that stretch of time. But, she has wins over Rose Namajunas. Those losses came to Joanna Jędrzejczyk.
Don't do this. You cannot do this, you know?
Claudia Gadelha, Jessica Andrade, Michelle Waterson Gomez, the Karate Hottie, UFC flyweight champion Alexa Grasso, Yan Xiaonan, and Jessica Panay. Then, out of nowhere, starting in June of 2022, she rattles off 4 in a row against Felice Herrig, Savannah Gomez-Juarez, Vanessa Demopoulos, and Diana Belbita. She is coming off of a loss to Yasmin Lucendo May of this year at UFC 301. She got outstruck 83-42 and got taken down twice in that fight. Denise Gomez, not pushing 40. In fact, she is 14 years younger than Karolina Kowalkiewicz. She's only lost 2 fights in the UFC. Both were by decision to Angela Hill and Loma Lookboonmee. Coming off the split decision win over Eduarda Mora, where she survived the 5 takedowns and outstruck Mora 50-18. Angela Hill was able to get Denise Gomez down 5 times. I think that, if anything, is the area of concern. Loma took her down 4 times. That is concerning, and 3 fights that you had that were all, pretty close. Yeah, she got beaten a little bit more thoroughly by Loma, of all things. But you get taken down a combined 14 times in those 3 fights. But then you had 2 knockouts against Yasmin Uruguay and Bruna Brazil. So you love to see power from people in these weight classes for sure. And she has definitely demonstrated that. And when she doesn't get a knockout, or even when she does, her striking volume is solid. She landed 103 strikes against Ryan Dos Santos in a unanimous decision win on the Contender Series August of 2022. These age gaps are not a good thing for the older fighters. Karolina Kowalkiewicz probably deserves to be a plus 420 underdog. I wouldn't hate you for going Karolina Kowalkiewicz plus 420. It's a funny number, first of all, but, Karolina Kowalkiewicz, is not far separated from a 4-fight winning streak. And, all of those losses ended up to very good fighters, especially over her longer losing streak. I definitely can't blame you for going with a heavy underdog in Carolina. But this is one where you also have to just trust what these trends say. And you got to trust, too, that, you look at how Carolina has lost her recent fights. I think Carolina maybe, let's see here. Carolina could definitely get 1 to 3 takedowns. I think that would, be wise of her to try to do that. But if Carolina lands 30 strikes, Denise will land 50. And if Carolina lands 40, I think Denise could land 60 to 70, at least. And those strikes are going to hurt Carolina, especially being almost 40 years old. So, I think Denise Gomez, it's actually been now 6 years since Carolina has been knocked out. And that was to Jessica Andrade. That was the only time in her UFC career. So I think the right thing to do here is Denise Gomez by decision minus 150. I don't hate Denise Gomez by knockout plus 275 at all, because at a certain point when you get up there in age, no matter how few times you've been knocked out in your UFC career, it just gets more and more likely every time you step back in there. So, and this doesn't even make any sense. Carolina is plus 420 to win. By decision, it's plus 400. Makes no sense at all. So, Carolina money line, if you're going with her and if you believe in that veteran savvy, then that makes sense. And Carolina by split decision, even, that's plus 1,400. Denise by split decision, plus 1,200. Yeah, because in a winning effort, I think it's more likely to be emphatically for Denise Gomez. I'd stick with either Denise by decision or Denise by knockout. If you're having some fun, you're being nostalgic, Carolina money line could be fun, and it's, definitely not outside the realm of possibility. But, that run has to end for everybody at some point. Next up, we've got a middleweight matchup between Mansour Abdul Malik and Dusko Todorovic. Dusko is the plus 300 underdog. Mansour, the minus 365 favorite. Yeah, playing the crow in there. Let's talk about Mansour Abdul Malik, 6-0 as a professional, 27 years old. His last fight was August in the Contender Series. 6'2", 80-inch reach for this middleweight division. 5 wins by knockout, 1 by submission. All his professional wins are inside the distance. Very limited high-level professional career for him. He's been in LFA, for a fight against a 1-0 opponent, Alan St. Galais. Yeah. That was a first-round TKO. He's been in Shogun fights a couple of times. You know, just like before the Contender Series where he got that second-round TKO over Wes Schultz. And what was Wes Schultz up to in the meantime? I feel like he fought again. No, he did not. No, that was super recent, too. Like, I remember the Wes Schultz pick, too, and it didn't go well on the Contender Series. But, like, before Wes Schultz, his 3 previous fights, the combined record of those opponents was 3-2, 5-7 for over the course of 3 opponents. So then you got Dusko Todorovic on the other hand. Born in 1994. Winner of 4 fights in the UFC, loser of 4. And, you know, the wins, I mean, like, that's counting the Contender Series, too. A fight, you know, where he beat Teddy Ash by unanimous decision, getting outstruck 109-102. Every other one of his UFC wins is by knockout. Against Daquan Townsend, Maki Pitolo, and Jordan Wright. My issue is that those 3 guys don't mean a ton to me. You know, I'm sure that's what everybody else is thinking.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
And all 3 of those fights were by knockout, but 3 of his UFC losses are by knockout to Punahele Soriano, Chidi Njokuani, and most recently, back in March of 2023, against Christian Leroy Duncan. Of all things, the one guy who did not knock out Dusko Todorovic was Gregory RoboCop Rodriguez. What a world. What a world. Now, I mean, it does bother me that, like, this guy's fought twice since May of 2022. 1 win. It's against Jordan Wright. And, I mean, those are all replacement-level fighters at middleweight. And even though it takes a little bit of a leap to say, like I can't, again, this is one where, like, I guess I can't fault you for going, like, Dusko plus 300 for a guy with, you know, almost a 500, winning percentage in the UFC, if you count the Contender Series. Dusko by knockout plus 600, it would be hard to fault you for that, just given his professional pedigree. And it takes a leap to say, like, with the competition that Mansour has faced at this point, that, like, he's ready to handle Dusko Todorovic. But, like, I think that all it really takes, it is shown to, like, be able to handle Dusko Todorovic is be slightly above replacement level. And Mansour Abdul Malik certainly looked above the replacement level in his fight with Wes Schultz in the Contender Series. So, like, Mansour by knockout minus 165. I think that is the most reasonable way to go. If you're feeling crazy, Dusko by knockout too. I don't really believe in hedging the vast majority of the time, but, like, I think this fight's over under, let's say, under 1.5 is minus 155. Over 1.5 plus 125. Yeah, I'd probably say, like, over 1.5. Like, and that could be, like, on Dusko's side. Like, maybe Mansour's ready to storm him, but, like, it's been a while since Dusko's even been in the octagon. And it is a guy, like, just with more experience. Not necessarily the kind of experience that lets you get deeper into fights. But, Ellie made it the distance with RoboCop. Maybe you can at least make it into, the latter half of this fight. So maybe over 1.5 plus 125. I think that's good. Mansour by knockout minus 165. And, like, I can't hate on, like, Abdul Malik. No, inside the distance is minus 250. That is a much reduced value. Mansour by knockout minus 165. Hit it.
Ow!
And I'll also say over 1.5 plus 125. Slap it.
Ow!
That's a hard one to call. There's a handful of these already. And, like, this is what, there's always a handful of these every week now. Nothing is ever straightforward. And when we think it's straightforward, it's probably the least straightforward, as we found out a few weeks ago. But this is when you have to make cards work and you're getting guys off the Contender Series. You're doing late replacements. You're putting cards on every week. There's always going to be a bunch of fights that are hard to call. And this co-main event is weird too, but, like, we still got 2 fights in between there. And I do not understand why. I'll get to it in a second. I don't understand why the co-main event is what it is, when I think that there should be a very clear co-main event in this fight. But We move on to a women's strawweight matchup between Luana Pinheiro and Jillian Robertson. Jillian Robertson is the minus 375 favorite. Luana the plus 310 underdog. Let's start off with Luana. All right. 1-4 in a row coming into the UFC. Counting the Contender Series, that was a knockout in the first round against Stephanie Frosto. A DQ against Ronda Marcos in a fight that she was winning, outstriking her 29-18, 5 takedowns to 0. Then she was coming off 2 straight decisions. One against Sam Hughes, she outstruck her 60-53, 2 takedowns to 0 with a knockdown en route to that victory. And then a split decision win in what was a very competitive fight with Michelle Waterson-Gomez, April of 2023. Now she's been finished 2 fights in a row. A 3rd round knockout against Amanda Ribas, a fight she was losing, going into the 3rd round for sure, and then a 2nd round submission against Angela Hill. Angela Hill got her with the guillotine.
Don't do this. You cannot do this,
By that same token, we have Jillian Robertson, born in 1995. She is 3 years younger. She will have a 1-inch reach advantage. She is 3 inches taller. She is now the winner of 4 of her last 5 fights, dating back to September of 2022. Winner of both of her fights this year in 2024. So, 3 finishes in that 5-fight stretch. 2 submissions against Maria Agapova. She was getting kind of pieced up in the striking numbers in that one. But she ends up getting the rear naked choke in the 2nd round. She gets an armbar against Piera Rodriguez, April of 2023. Takes a unanimous decision loss to Tabitha Ritchie in the meantime. And what was, again, a reasonably competitive fight. She got outstruck 100-76, 3 takedowns to 1 for Ritchie. And now she's on a 2-fight winning streak against Poliana Viana by 2nd round knockout January of this year at UFC 297. And is coming off a unanimous decision victory over the Karate Hottie, outstriking her 77-21, 2 takedowns to 1. You go back, so many of her wins are inside the distance, and the majority of them by submission. Also with wins over Veronica Hardy, Molly McCann, Emily Whitmire, Courtney Casey, Poliana Botello, Priscilla Kuchera. Her other fights that she's had, she's fought, solid veterans, Macy Barba, Myra Bueno Silva, Tyler Santos, Miranda Maverick, JJ Aldridge, if I didn't already say that. This one seems just oh God, a little bit too clear. If Luana's hallmark victory is the Karate Hottie fight from April of 2023, that was a split decision, and if you have to go past that, if it's Sam Hughes, is Jillian Robertson closer to Sam Hughes or, and Michelle Waterson-Gomez at that point in the Karate Hottie's career? Or is she closer to Angela Hill and Amanda Ribas? Absolutely, she is closer to the latter 2. These odds are very reasonable. And, hopefully to go back, I do think, Mansour does win, probably 75 to 80 of these fights out of 100. 70 to 80. I think maybe it's wiser to give a bit of a wider range on that one. Did I forget any? I think Denise Gomez wins that fight probably 75 to 80 times out of 100. And Jillian Robertson here, I think, should win this fight 75 to 80 times out of 100 too. If you're going Jillian Robertson, I think inside the distance is the most reasonable because, it's not necessarily Robertson's most likely method of victory here is by submission. That's plus 140, and I can't fault that at all. And I but the knockout or the TKO is very much in play here. But at plus 500, I agree that I don't know if it's necessarily worth just singling it out like that. Jillian Robertson inside the distance is minus 160. So I'm either going Jillian Robertson by submission or I'm going Jillian Roberts inside the distance at minus 160. Hit both of them.
Ow!
Yeah, I'm just not inspired by Luana in any stretch. If I was going to go Luana, I think I'd have to go by decision plus 425. And I think, if I was actually going to go Luana, I think you just, sprinkle a tiny bit on by split decision plus 1,200. Because I think it would kind of have to be a very close fight. There might even have to be bad judging there. Because Jillian Robertson, is really good at being opportunistic and doing the damage when she needs to, especially against a certain quality of opponent. And Luana Pinheiro is very, very, very much within that range. So I think those odds are appropriate. Looking forward to seeing Jillian Robertson fight. Now, what should be the people's co-main event of this card, there's probably multiple candidates for that. I know that there are some MMA fans that apparently don't even care about this fight. But for me,
break out the red panties.
Because we got a middleweight matchup between Gerald Meerschaert and Rainier de Ridder. Rainier de Ridder. All right? So, Gerald Meerschaert is going to be... Son of a bitch. Never easy. Meerschaert is the plus 240 underdog. Rainier is the minus 280 favorite. Let's start off with de Ridder. I love this guy. 17-2 as a pro. 34 years old. Currently ranked number 86th in the world at light heavyweight. Now, why do I like this guy so much? Why should you like this guy a bunch? Because this guy is a veteran of many different high-level organizations across the world. And, he fought in the UFC. Then he transitioned to ONE. He beat Ong La Nsang in ONE 2 times in a row to capture the ONE heavyweight and the ONE light heavyweight championship. Of course, different kind of corresponding weights for that. It has a submission win over Vitaly Bigdash. Yeah, it submitted Sang with a rear naked choke the first time that they fought. Then, for this ONE heavyweight championship, and I guess, it says that there was at 265 against Malikin, and Anatoly Malikin, who's going to be fighting this Friday. But I don't think that is correct, especially when you just eyeball de Ridder. But anyway, what it took to actually, dethrone this guy from ONE is the guy that, ended up becoming a 2-division champion. ONE has had, some very compelling 2-division champions in those, upper weight classes. And now he is coming off of a first-round knockout over Magomed Murad Kasayev at UAE Warriors 51 July of this year. 12 wins by submission in his career, 3 by knockout, 2 by decision. Gerald Meerschaert, winner of 2 in a row, 2 submissions over Edmund Shabazian and Brian Barberena. That's troublesome. Gerald Meerschaert has, successfully existed at a certain level of this UFC middleweight division for some time. September of 2020 is his activity level's been really good. He's already fought twice this year, 2 wins this year, as I just said. But, you go back to 2020, he took 2 losses to Ian Heinisch and Hamzat Chimaev. This guy's been in the UFC since 2016 and has fought a ton of names. Thiago Santos. He's fought Jack Hermanson, Kevin Holland, Eric Anders. But more recently, his last, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. His last 9 wins in the UFC, and I believe 11 of 12 have been by submission. The other one was by not. So everything inside the distance for this guy. He loses in a variety of ways too. Has not been submitted. I think that is what was submitted by Jack Hermanson. There we go. I think that's what does make this a compelling matchup. My heart is with de Ridder here, and I really trust that, maybe Meerschaert is a bit too much of an underdog here, and I don't think, if you believe in Meerschaert that you have to go with a method of victory. I like Meerschaert at plus 240. I think that's very reasonable because I do think he can win, 35, 40, maybe a little bit more of these out of 100. But de Ridder has existed in other organizations at a high level for some time. And it took the current ONE champion, who's just a bigger, stronger guy who was able to put him away, in nastier means. It took that, to dethrone him. And so maybe like the interest isn't as much there for DeRitter right now, just because it took him, losing those belts with one before transitioning to the UFC. And I don't know exactly like how this goes too. It's like I almost like bets for Meerschaert better here, but like I think DeRitter ends up winning the majority of these. Over 1.5 of this fight is minus 205, and I think that makes sense. Like Meerschaert inside the distance, because I think DeRitter is like maybe just going to be too savvy of a grappler for Meerschaert to actually catch in a submission. But like Meerschaert inside the distance, just to go along with everything else that's happened in his professional and in his UFC career, that's plus 350, okay? DeRitter inside the distance is plus 110. And I think we're getting a little bit closer there. DeRitter by knockout plus 500. I think that is well within the realm of possibility. I think that it's going to be really hard to predict, like when you're talking about a guy like Gerald Meerschaert and the opponent that he's facing here, like a guy that's only one inside the distance, a guy that I think is going to be too skilled for Gerald Meerschaert to kind of like win in some of the ways he's been able to, like against Edmund Shabazian and the like. But then again, it's hard to see this fight go in the distance. So if I was going to go with one single bet here, I think it would be DeRitter by knockout plus 500, I think is the best value. That's when I'm taking a little bit more of a risk here. Maybe even I stay away from this one just because I think I'm a little bit too interested to be as unbiased as I need to pick one there. But like, that's where I'm probably going is plus 500 for DeRitter. I don't feel too strongly about anything here. I think that this fight could be fun and chaotic. That's what we're looking for. If you're going in on Gerald Meerschaert, I actually think that this is weird enough to where he could break, the pattern that has existed in his UFC career. But I think what he's done in the UFC, the guys that he's fought over a long period of time, I think that it's worth definitely enough credit to believe in him at plus 240. I'm kind of surprised that DeRitter is, as favored as much as he is at minus 280. Next up, we're on to the official co-main event. A bantamweight matchup between Bernardo Sopaj and Ricky Turcios. Ricky Turcios, the Ultimate Fighter winner. Things haven't gone so well for Ricky Turcios since then. Turcios is the plus 285 underdog. Sopaj the minus 360 favorite. Well, let's talk about Ricky Turcios first. So, had that loss to Boston Salmon on the Contender Series over 7 years ago. And a fight like that was really competitive. He outstruck Salmon 110-61. Swimming upriver for that one. And then, this is the crazy thing. We've seen Brady Heistand just kind of look better and better since that Ultimate Fighter finale. And Turcios, it has not been the case. But maybe we're being hard on Turcios because he has had to fight some fighters that have just looked better and better in their own right. So he beats Brady Heistand and lands 100 strikes. Another, triple-digit striking performance. You like to see it. He lost that unanimous decision where he got doubled up in the striking by Ayman Zahabi, July of 2022. Wins a split decision against Kevin Natividad in a fight where he did get taken down 7 times and knocked down. November of 2022. Now he's coming off a second-round submission loss to Raul Rosas Jr. in a fight where he was talking mad smack, and it ended that was where it seemed like the aura for Ricky Turcios changed. With all the intensity that went into the Raul Rosas Jr. fight, and the way he lost it was just pretty lackluster. Sopaj, on the other hand, lost his UFC debut by third-round knockout to Vinicius Oliveira. Sopaj, he's only 24 years old, 7 wins by knockout, 3 by submission, 1 by decision. And, very limited stuff here. He has a good amount of pro fights, just, I don't know what the meaning of them really is. And, for instance, Sopaj's last win in AFN 4 when he fought for their title, December 2023, submission to punches against an 11-4 opponent. That's a red flag to me a little bit. The previous 2 opponents, they, were 5-2-1 and 5-1. You go back to when he fought in some reputable organizations like Brave CF. He ended up with a 1-1 record there. Both fights going the distance. this seems like, again, some wild handicapping. Like, I don't want to overreact to Ricky Tercios' last fight against Raul Rosas Jr. And, I think, like, even the gap of time aside between his... Like, he fought at the end of 2022, and he looked all right doing that. I think that Sopaj getting a knockout is definitely within the realm of possibility. That still hasn't happened to Tercios, like, in the UFC. And has it happened in his pro career at all? One loss by knockout, and you have to go back to Fury FC in 2018. But even, hell, the wins that he has even on the Ultimate Fighter, I Stand, Ludwig Schelinian, and Dan Argueta, I actually, like, those are more, that gives me a lot more confidence in him. I don't, especially after how Zahabi looked this past week, I don't need to lose confidence in Tercios that much. This kind of goes against what I was thinking I would feel going into this, but I don't know, I think Tercios can win this fight, like, 40, 50, 52 times out of 100. Give me Tercios. Money line plus 285. Hit it. If I'm going method of victory here, I think like you go Sopaj by knockout plus 325. And I think you go Tercios by decision plus 500. Tercios by decision plus 500 I think is very reasonable. I'm not touching over under 2.5 here because over is minus 180. Under 2.5 is plus 150. And the under would have to be a Sopaj win, most likely. And I don't know if I think that that's all that likely to be worth under 2.5 at plus 150. Just not enough for me. Tercios by decision, I don't know, plus 500. Hell, Tercios by split decision, plus 1,000. I think that that's reasonable, but plus 285 on the money line, concerning the pace, the chaotic nature at which Ricky Tercios fights tend to go, I don't think that, you're not losing too much value there. He's still a pretty big underdog here in a fight that I think is very winnable for him. And now, we are to the main event of the evening. A welterweight matchup between Neil Magny and Carlos Paredes.
Break out the red panties.
Carlos Paredes, well known for being with the Fighting Nerds, smoking cigarettes before, probably after fights. It's a part of his regimen. Can't knock it. Doesn't seem to bother him at all. In fact, I'm trying to think of a quote. The late great King Kelly Coleman, one of the most storied basketball players in the history of Kentucky high school basketball. Someone once asked him, or told him, like, hey, you got to quit drinking before your fights. Or, damn it, you got to quit drinking before your games. It's affecting you. And King Kelly Coleman, took a bite of a burger, drank some whiskey, and said, apparently not. Hard to argue with that logic. Neil Magny in this fight, the long-standing veteran of the welterweight division, he is the plus 550 underdog. Paredes is the minus 750 favorite. Woof. Let's talk about Neil Magny first. All right. Winner of 2 of his last 4, dating back to June of 2023. Just to go back, Neil Magny has been in the UFC since February of 2013. The names that this guy has fought over that long period of time, it took a while. It took a lot of winning for him to start getting some bigger names like Kelvin Gastelum, Hector Lombard, Lorenz Larkin, Johnny Hendricks, proving himself at those levels, fighting RDA and Carlos Condit, Li Jiangliang. And my God, Robbie Lawler, who he beat, fought Michael Chiesa, wins over Jeff Neal. Now we're in the 2020s. But skipping forward just a little bit, after his loss to Gilbert Burns, winner of 2 of his last 4, a decision against Phil Rowe, and that crazy comeback victory over Mike Malott, UFC 297, January of this year. Mike quit in that fight. That's where the veteran experience, came up big. But, this is a difference here. You take it was notoriously, it's been hard to knock out Neil Magny throughout his UFC career. Not too many people have done it. Lorenz Larkin did it. Santiago Ponzinibbio. Shavkat Rakhmonov submitted him. It's been easier to submit him historically, I believe. But now he's coming off a knockout loss to Michael Morales. August of this year, got outstruck 34-5 en route to the first round knockout. And, only lost the decision to Ian Machado Gary, but Ian Gary has now been finishing people as he moves up in his levels of competition. Carlos Paredes. All right, so Neil Magny born in 1987, Paredes born in 1993. The age difference is actually not as significant as you would think, but my God, since coming in through the Contender Series, this guy 20-6, it's amazing to think about 6 people beating this guy as a professional with how he has looked in the UFC. But Paredes has won all 4 of his UFC fights by knockout, starting off in the Contender Series against Mitch Ramirez, then knocks out Trevin Giles. He knocks out Charles Radke. And then against Li Jiangliang, August of this year, UFC 305 gets the second round knockout, outstriking him 55-41 with 3 knockdowns. I hate to be predictable on this one. I really do. Because, so under 2.5 in this fight is minus 210. Paredes by knockout is minus 300. I don't think Paredes by decision, which is plus 800, I don't think that's even worth the shot. Because the longer that the fight goes on, if the cigarette smoking catches up to Paredes, maybe Neil Magny, ends up pulling something out or, fighting an MMA fight in a Sevi veteran style throughout those last 2 rounds. We just haven't seen Paredes in those situations yet for me to trust him, especially not against a guy like Neil Magny. But, by far the most obvious prop here is Paredes by knockout. And especially with Magny coming off of that knockout loss to Michael Morales. If I'm going Neil Magny here, you go by decision plus 800, or you go by submission plus 1,000. But I've been burned a little bit too much lately on those Neil Magny picks where it's he hasn't fought a guy like Neil Magny yet. Yeah, I've seen enough from Paredes. I've seen enough, and I've seen enough from Neil Magny, trying to hang around in this UFC welterweight division. So, Paredes by knockout minus 300. I mean, that's parlay worthy. I do think that it is. Paredes in round 1. Because, again, this is going to be a 5-round fight. And you would think that that definitely favors Neil Magny. It's hard to see that this fight going too much longer. But, Paredes in round 1 plus 200. Paredes in round 2 plus 350. Paredes in round 3 plus 450. In that order, so I'd say Paredes in round 2 plus 350 is actually my favorite pick. I think Neil Magny can possibly survive into the second round. He might even get dropped a couple times in the first, survive, then Paredes finishes the job in the second round. I think that's the clearest vision I have of this fight. Then, I could see, Paredes still putting him away in round 1 plus 200. I think that's very reasonable. Paredes in round 3 plus 450. Those are, my 3 favorite props for this fight. And you can go Paredes by knockout in round 2 plus 400. I think you have to get super specific on this one. I'm going to love Paredes in DFS. I do think that he wins this fight 80 times out of 100 at this point. That's no disrespect to Neil Magny. It really isn't, but
Don't do this. You cannot do this,
So, yeah, if you're not throwing Paredes by knockout, minus 300 in a parlay, I think you have to get super specific in this one and really thread the needle. That can be tough to do, so I wouldn't blame you for avoiding it. Folks, that is it for episode 157 of RotoBallers' official MMA podcast. Tap that. We were talking about UFC Vegas 100 tonight. Again, Invicta was tonight. We got LFA 1 Octagon coming up this weekend. For my picks on all of that stuff and more, follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast on Facebook, on Spotify, and YouTube at Tap That MMA Podcast. Like, subscribe, leave favorable comments, reviews, tell your friends. Check out my MMA DFS value picks article coming out on Friday afternoons every week moving forward before UFC cards. Come out to the RotoBaller MMA Discord this Saturday. Let's talk about DFS and sports betting for UFC Vegas 100. Folks, thank you so much for listening this week. I hope y'all had a happy Halloween this past week. Have yourselves a great weekend of MMA from all, different corners of the world. Great prospects will be on display this week, so enjoy all that and more. Have a great weekend. College basketball is here too. Let's go. And peace.